Hood's division. They're going to go in first. They're the first attack. They're going to attack places like Little Round Top, the Devil's Den, and into the wheat field, okay? Now, the next division over is Lafayette McLaws, okay? And he is going to have South Carolinians under Kershaw and Mississippians under Barksdale in front, supported again by Georgians in the back. He's got Wofford's Georgians and Semmes's Georgians supporting them. So now you've got 8 brigades here. We're talking about 14,500 soldiers. They're going to be additionally supported by some men from Anderson's division. Excuse my math, it might be a little off here, but then you're talking about Perry or Lang's Floridians, and then you're talking about Wilcox's Alabamians. We've already talked about them a little bit. Wright's Georgians, and then it seems to end there. This massive attack will, in addition to the places I mentioned earlier, include the Peach Orchard, the Trossel Farm, the Emmitsburg Road, Cemetery Ridge, and the Confederates. You know they're going to make some gains, but they don't achieve their ultimate objective. Sorry to spoil the end, but it is despite that failure that James Longstreet calls this the best 3 hours fighting ever done by any troops on any battlefield. So I'm going to bring on Tim in a second, but first just note, flags flying in the air. They are ready to attack. The Confederates are weary after their long march, but they are ready to end this thing. They're ready to get it done. And Alabamians and Texans step out of the woods behind me and off in this area. And their orders are to go up the Emmitsburg Road. They're going to make a wide wheel where the Alabamians on the right will march far into this field before heading and swinging up the Emmitsburg Road to upset the Union position there. And if you could freeze time right there, things are probably going pretty well for the Confederates, but the Yankees aren't exactly cooperating, and a few things happen that are going to disrupt this attack. Tim Smith, licensed battlefield guy.
And before that, man, hashtag name drops, hashtag place drops. It was all over the place.
Yeah, man, I'm ready to go.
You know, if you consider the fact that the Gettysburg Battlefield's about 20 square miles, something like 5 miles long and 4 miles across, it's a pretty sizable area, but most of the heavy fighting of the battle occurred out in front of us in these areas, from from Seminary Ridge to Big and Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the wheat field, and the Peach Orchard on the Emmitsburg Road. This is the intense fighting that really made the Battle of Gettysburg the bloodiest battle in American history. Now, General Hood's division will launch the attack, and we already talked a little bit about earlier in the day about Hood's plan. As soon as the troops stepped off, things did not seem to go as scripted. The 1st Texas and the 3rd Arkansas of Robertson's brigade turned and started heading up the Emmitsburg Road. And the 4th and 5th Texas broke away from them and headed straight across. And Lowell's Alabama brigade headed straight across. And immediately, a large gap opened up in the middle of Robertson's brigade. As it got closer down here into the slope ground, Lowell, in command of the Alabamians, and began to see the gap and realize it was a huge amount of artillery at Devil's Den and Little Round Top firing into them. So the 2 regiments on the end of the Alabama brigade were pulled out of line, the 44th and the 47th Alabama, and the 48th Alabama, and they were pulled back, and they actually swung behind the rest of the Alabamians and Texans and headed across this low ground towards the area of Devil's Den. Now, what's interesting is that the second wave of the attack, Benning's brigade and Ty Anderson's Georgia brigade came out of the woods as all this chaos was ensuing. Now, the man who, with the plan that could have sorted all the chaos out, was John Bell Hood. But unfortunately, he was wounded early in the fight, almost immediately after the attack stepped off, and the division commander was down. Law would take command of the division, but not realize he was in command for a while. And by the time he took command, there's no real evidence he exercised any division command that day. And Robertson, part of his troops were on Little Round Top, part of his troops were at Devil's Den and into the edge of the wheat field. And he doesn't seem to have exercised any kind of brigade command either. So late afternoon of the second day. And when Benning's brigade came up, in a perfect world, Benning's brigade was supposed to follow Law's brigade, and they would have went up and over Big Round Top like Law's brigade did and hit the troops on Little Round Top. But when Benning stepped out, all he really saw through the smoke of battle was the Alabamians heading across the rear of the troops towards Devil's Den, and so Benning turned and headed towards Devil's Den also. And of course, because of that, Devil's Den would fall. And Anderson's brigade would just be the first brigade to enter that meat grinder called the wheat field. But there would be no second wave of assault on Little Round Top. And ultimately, this chaos and confusion would cause the Union line to hold on the second day, or would be a contributing factor. I'm not saying that South would have won, but things did not go as planned.
Good. Thanks, Tim. And if any of this confuses you, get out your map. Join the American Battlefield Trust and get one of those map books that we sometimes offer. You can purchase them, I think, through our shop as well. So you can check out our maps free online as well. Have some good maps with you. And one thing I keep saying, and to some degree, if you know that Longstreet's Corps has Hood's, McLaws, and Pickett's divisions, aha, you're starting to understand that a little bit better. And then you'll start to wonder, well, Hood and McLaws are here. Where's Pickett on July 2nd? Aha, he was left behind, and that's why he's the one in Pickett charge. It makes sense. If you can get to the division level, great. You can go to the brigade level, things really start to make sense. So we appreciate you all watching. We hope you'll share this with your friends. I'm seeing a lot of people with good comments already and whatnot. And I want to bring out Chris Wachowski, Emerging Civil War, who is doubtless going to have something thoughtful and cool to say.
One of the things that I really like about this particular spot on the battlefield is the view that it provides, particularly since the Park Service did its landscape restoration. We're trying to kind of see if we can remember what the date was. But early 2000s, they started clearing out this land behind me. And it's tempting to come down here to the flank and kind of just look down and so you can get down to the round tops of room wants to get down to the fun stuff. But I urge people to stop here because we're looking across this landscape, which is now opened up with the timber removal. You get such a fantastic view of the topography, and you can see how the advance of the Confederates in echelon runs into these very famous and very different topographical features. I like to think of it as a checkers board, and if you've got a line of checkers in front of you, you're going to start in the right-hand row, and you start moving your checker forward, and then you move the second checker and the third checker, and that's how this an echelon attack unfolds. But as those checkers move forward, imagine suddenly Little Round Top on the checkerboard. You've got Devil's Den, you've got the wheat field, of course you've got the Big Round Top. And so as these checkers advance, we have these different topographical features followed in by this view of the civil economy, and it really dictates how this really unfolds on that brigade level that Gary was just talking about. And so you really appreciate that from seeing it from this perspective. So instead of just a pass by, it's really, I think, a must-see stop on the battlefield. You can also see how rocky the terrain is. Chris earlier showed you these rock walls that come through this area. Imagine doing a cavalry charge if you're Elon Farnsworth, and you have to run across terrain like that on horseback. Craziness. You can appreciate that now.
That's a great point. Here we are. I mean, when this was in woods, you couldn't see these stone walls very well. And I remember Tim and I, when we were working on our Devil's Den stuff back in '96 and whatnot, we found one photo. It was in New York at Gettysburg, and it actually showed Devil's Den from Warfield's Ridge. Wow! It had been covered up for 100 years. Nobody living had ever seen that view. We had this one picture, and we were just absolutely blown away by it. Now we can see it. And why is that important? Of course, it's important to see what the troops saw. This is a national military park. Its purpose is to interpret this three-day event as well as the Gettysburg Address and the civilian experience here. So the more the battlefield looks like it did, the better we can understand it. So I think it's a great point, Chris, and we should appreciate all the great work the Gettysburg National Military Park has done, along with their partners as well. Anything else to add, guys?
Preservation is so important.
That's why battlefield preservation is so important. Oh man, everybody, I bet you already know where we are. That's Little Round Round Top. Behind me, I'm Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust. We've got a couple of guests with us while we talk about the attack and defense of Little Round Top in brief, and then a special surprise from a cool rock coming up at the end. So here we are on Little Round Top. Let's just do a little bit of an orientation here. On July 2nd, 1863, Little Round Top was entirely unoccupied, save for some signalmen. This is on the afternoon of July 2nd. You know that's happening because Dan Sickles has moved his 3rd Corps out to the Peach Orchard and Emmitsburg Road and is going to... Hey everybody, Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust. Here we are in the legendary Shurfy Peach Orchard. The Emmitsburg Road is right behind the camera. You'll be hearing some vehicles going by here and there. That's one of them right there. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. Please share this with your friends and as many people as possible can see it. We have some additional guests with us today. Looking forward to bringing them on. But first, I think we need to talk about why we even talk about the Peach Orchard in the first place. This is Shurfy's Peach Orchard. He expands that Peach Orchard before the battle. It's a substantial orchard. He has other business interests going on and whatnot. And he also has a lot of land holdings. In fact, some of the bloodiest fighting at Gettysburg, the Rose Woods, the wheat field, and many other areas around the Peach Orchard are all really Shurfy's land. It's the bloodiest, according to some, bloodiest civil property in all of American history. And it is because on July 2nd, 1863, Dan Sickles, not satisfied with some of the ground on the line to which he was assigned, specifically that north of Little Round Top, decides to move his soldiers out here to this high open ground called the Peach Orchard. Here, he can see in every direction. Here, he can finally use his artillery and whatnot. But here, he is right up to the enemy line. Closer to the enemy than he is to his own gun. Barksdale's Mississippians are over in this direction. You've got Kershaw, South Carolinians off in that direction. He's closer to the enemy than to his own. Sickles comes up here. He takes up a line that he does not have enough men to man. So he's got gaps in his line. And here he creates a dangerous salient. Okay? We have the salient here. We've got Sickles men facing that way. Sickles men facing that way. The first threat will come from that way. And to talk about it first, let's bring on Doug Dowd, licensed battlefield guy. So think about it. We know that Longstreet been making this flank march ever since this morning. When they break out of those woods about 3:30 in the afternoon, they realize they cannot conduct the attack they expected to, which was to be one division followed and traced by another and attack up the Emmitsburg Road, rolling up the Union line. They can no longer do that. So what they do is they have a brief war conference. What they decide to do is extend the Confederate line almost another mile, and they're going to launch an echelon attack. What's that? Imagine a wave hitting a beach on an angle, or you can think about this in terms of dominoes. The first domino will fall at about 4 o'clock, run into Little Round Top, Devil's Neck. The second one will go about 5 o'clock. This will be Kershaw, South Carolina. They're going to cross this field, picture long lines of Confederates marching from our right to our left across this field. And now we can start to see, because today we're standing truly at the salient. When the Union soldiers that are here, facing the Confederate line and that far tree line, realize there's Confederates that have given them their flank, they're going to rush down to the southern end of this Peach Orchard, and they're going to fire into the northern flank of Kershaw. Longstreet will actually bring that brigade all the way out to the Emmitsburg Road before he will go back and catch up with the next domino. This is going to be William Barksdale, fiery Mississippian congressman, and he's going to have his 1,300 Mississippians just over there. His men will be shot at by Union cannon, and he will say, "I wish you'd let me go in. I'll take those batteries in 5 minutes." Now, ultimately, Longstreet will say, "Patience, General. We're all going in presently." And what he allows is for this reaction to take place, and then finally, at about 6 o'clock in the evening, he's going to unleash Barksdale's Mississippi Brigade. 1,300 Mississippians crossing this 500 yards in just under 5 minutes. They're going to slam into this Peach Orchard position, as well as the Shurfy house and barn, and this is what obliterates the salient position. For all the Union soldiers at the southern end of this field, they now have Mississippians behind them. That doesn't work. And so they're going to fall back, try to establish another position before they will fall back. Now, Barksdale, interestingly enough, one of his regiments will continue down this road, but the rest of his brigade will swing north and start to flank the rest of the Union soldiers up there, including Humphrey's line. And I'm going to turn it over to Doug Ullman to tell us about what happens with it. So, Andrew Atkinson, Humphreys is the commander of the 2nd Division of the 3rd Corps, and just a few days before this, George Meade has asked him if he wants to says, no, I want to be commanding troops in the battlefield. So his division, or rather, 2 brigades of them, are lined up along the Emmitsburg Road when this attack begins. Now, Humphreys is already short-staffed. His 3rd Brigade, under George Burling, has been pieced out all over the battlefield. So he's got 2 brigades left. That Carr and Brewster, the Excelsior Brigade. And so the Excelsior Brigade is going to wheel and face against Barksdale. It's minimum over. In the meantime, Carr is going to pressure from Confederates coming across the fields west of the Emmitsburg Road. And ultimately, Humphreys, despite his best efforts, is going to have to fall back. He's going to constantly try and rally his men to fight back. But he is completely outnumbered and outmatched. He's going to rely on the artillery to help him take him back across the Joseph Fall.
Thanks, Doug. So here we are, and there's a lot going on right here, right? I mean, Union dominoes are falling. The Confederates come over. We can talk for an hour about why the Confederates were able to pull over this pretty strongly held position. So talk about how they oriented in the wrong direction, and Barksdale surprised them somehow coming out so quickly. There's lots of theories, but to bring it down to earth a little bit about both material culture and otherwise, we're bring on our really good friend who's been in this business longer than any of us. I don't mean anything about his age here. Dana Show from America's Civil War and Civil War Times Magazine. Come on, Dana.
Thank you, Gary, and thanks for having me on. I am the only one who can gray in my hair, so, it does sort of indicate some federal wisdom, perhaps. But I don't know the fighting nearly as well as these other fellas, but I thought you might like to see this Gardner explosive bullet, which I acquired from a relic dealer. And this was dug up on the peach orchard, in the peach orchard vicinity years ago when it was private property. I don't condone relic hunting on the battlefields now by any means, but these bullets are only found at Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. It's interesting because it's metal instead of lead, because it was filled with an explosive compound that was supposedly ignited when the gun was fired and burned through the fuse. It would ignite as it approached the enemy line. The pewter was used because it was more brittle and would shatter into fragments. So it's very interesting to think that some federal regiments on this position were using this type of bullet. They're not all that common. But sort of I'm approaching this more or less as a lay person because I don't know much about the fighting here and I'm learning a lot. And one of the things that I find intriguing about coming out here is the fact you can't see much when you're in this peach orchard. The flanks of these Federals are below ground. They're down in swales. The men to my right might not know what's going on in this area, be totally taken by surprise. And it really is an eye-opening experience to come out here with these guys and learn about the action. The other thing is that Farmer Sherfy, I have to feel sorry for. He's just expanded this large peach orchard, and he has a wealthy operation going here, and it's ruined, terribly ruined, in one day of fighting. So the civilian aspect out here is also important to remember and reflect on.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Dana. Let's walk a little bit here. And it's so true. I mean, we constantly think, oh, this was a battlefield. Oh, you had the honor to live in Gettysburg during the battle. No! I mean, your crops are ruined, your wells are poisoned, your kids have a good chance of being blown up when they find some sort of an artillery shell later. The town is thronged with tourists, and it's just a completely different. Their whole lives changed overnight when the armies just happened to come here, when the roads just happened to bring them here. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're walking around the peach orchard with all sorts of guests, and you can see all these cannons here. So this is known as a Union artillery position, right? Because you've got 3rd Corps artillery, U.S. artillery reserve batteries coming up here, right? And they are firing off in that direction. But it is just as much a Confederate artillery platform, right? So let's bring on Chris Mikowski, Emerging Civil War, to talk a little bit about E.P. Alexander and more.
So, on the 3rd of May, early morning hours, at the Battle of Chancellorsville, Joe Hooker has consolidated his line into a big horseshoe, and at the very tip, as a salient at Hazel Grove, sits Dan Sickles. And Hooker rides out there and he says, look, you're too exposed. I want you to pull back. I want you to give up this high ground so we can have a more consolidated position. Sickles doesn't like the order. He thinks that if he gives up the high ground at Hazel Grove, it's going to give the Confederates an artillery platform to bombard the Union position. But Hooker says, no, pull back. So Sickles gives up the high ground at Chancellorsville. Confederate artillery takes that spot, and then there is the devil to pay for the Union Army as a result in what becomes the second bloodiest day of the Civil War. So now let's flash forward to July 2nd, when Sickles sees a piece of high ground out in front of the main Union position, and he is told to stay back there. But he's thinking of Chancellorsville, where he had given up a piece of high ground that the Confederates used to their excellent advantage. So he's going to advance out here because he doesn't want to give up that high ground. So what happens at Chancellorsville influences his decision to take this position here. And it is a great piece of high ground. background, if you come out here, you can see it's much better than what he had back there. But because of all the things we've talked about, the way it's stretched out his line, it becomes problematic. So when his line finally collapses, and George Meade and his staff see him out here, and he says, the Confederates are not going to let you give up that spot without a fight. And of course, Longstreet proves him right. So as Sickles loses his leg, his men lose their position, everyone fall back pell-mell, Confederates are going to come up and once again use this piece of high ground as an artillery platform to begin bombarding the main federal line. E.P. Alexander, the First Corps' chief of artillery, comes out here and he talks about the sense of exhilaration that it is for an artilleryman to have the enemy on the run, fleeing across those fields. It's one of the moments he is fondest of in the entire war, the exhilaration that he feels. His boss, James Longstreet, comes out onto the field with Joe Kershaw, and as they survey the collapsing federal line, they realize now is the time to continue this attack, but Longstreet is spent. It's now time to pass the baton to A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps, and they're going to try to continue things with Richard Anderson's division north of this attack. And this is where things are really going to start to fall to pieces for the Confederates, which we'll talk about a little later. Gary?
Okay, I'm going to bring on Doug Downs in just a second, and then Dana Schoaf again. But just real quick, this is confusing stuff. You don't grasp the Battle of Gettysburg overnight. You might start to get it by corps after a little study, and maybe you get it down to the division level, or maybe you focus on one area. Like maybe you choose for some reason the Peach Orchard is your first place you want to study, and that's what you get good on. But don't worry if it doesn't make sense to you yet. Just keep plugging away and it will. Watch the American Battlefield Trust Gettysburg animated map. 17 minutes. It goes through the whole campaign and the battle, maybe to take you through it. You can watch other videos or study some maps. The Trust offers all sorts of maps on its website at battlefields.org. So let me turn it over to Doug Downs for some more insight as we move along.
So it's a really great snapshot of the organizational culture of both armies that are fighting here. If we think about the idea that Dan Sickles moves out here, what's the breakdown in communication that allows for 1/7 of the Union Army to displace itself nearly 3/4 of a mile in front of the rest of the Union line? Well, part of this has to do with personal relationship between General Meade and General Sickles. But then we also think about what are the implications of this. So this may have made sense in, his own decision-making for General Sickles to come out here based on his experience from the last battle. However, when he moves out here, he takes up a position he doesn't have enough men for. He's 3/4 of a mile in front of the rest of the Union Army. He creates a quarter-mile gap on his right. He doesn't even defend the high ground on a little round top anymore, and worse, he never tells General Meade that he's going to do this. And because of that, it really pulls all of General Meade's initiative. He sucks up the reserve that's the 5th Corps. He requires the 2nd Corps to support him. He has to tap into the artillery reserve, 118 pieces of artillery that the Army of the Potomac owned. And of course, he'll ultimately have to send Gouverneur K. Warren up to Little Round Top. On the flip side, if we look at the Confederate Army, we also see some dynamics here. An army that started a flank march and ends up in that tree line at 3:30. That seems like a long time for them to get to that tree line. But once they come out, they realize they cannot conduct this attack as planned. It takes them less than an hour to extend their battle line another mile to the south, change it to an echelon attack, and we should ask ourselves, how are they able to do that? Remember, in the reorganization of the Army of Northern Virginia, it is Longstreet's Corps that is unchanged. The idea that Hood McLaws had fought next to each other on other battlefields, that these units were used to fighting next to one another, is part of the reason that Longstreet would call this the greatest 3 hours of fighting done by any troops on any field of battle. We see the breakdown organizationally when we transition to a new Corps commander, and perhaps that gives us some insight about Robert E. Lee's complaint at the end of the day that except for a proper concert of action, we would have been more successful.
And let me move this along a little bit too, because so far with this Wheatfield and Peach Orchard action, we're talking about the 3rd Corps. We're talking about some of the different reinforcements that come in. We talked about the 2nd, Caldwell's division, West Kelly's, we've got 2 other forces involved here. And in fact, you've got all but 2 Union Corps fighting out here, including the artillery reserve, all but the 1st Corps. It's the 12th Corps, 5 late on the 2nd to help stem some of the tide, and you have elements of the 6th Corps that are fighting in the North Valley of Death. 1 6th Corps unit to fight on the 2nd day. I'm introducing this so we can really talk about the 3rd day here. Is Evans Brigade, the 3rd Brigade and 3rd Division of the 6th Corps. And one of those units is the 139th Pennsylvania, and they help stem the tide on the 2nd day, but then they make some action on the 3rd day. Dana?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in Evans Brigade because I've edited papers of John Nevin, who was actually the major of the 93rd Pennsylvania, different Nevin, in that same brigade. But that brigade would spend the night of July 2nd on the John Webber Farm
Tim? Okay, so this area that we're in right now is generally known as Devil's Den. And you might know that we're not sure exactly when it got its name or why it's called Devil's Den. It's a whole chapter in our book about the naming of Devil's Den, but it's a wild place filled with large rocks. And at the time of the Civil War, Devil's Den was owned by a local resident, John Howe. And he lives on Mortimer Street in the town of Gettysburg at the time of the battle. And it's one of the more interesting stories that we have. After our book was written, this rock we're staying on right now had been covered with lichen, and there was a large tree next to the rock. And it, I guess the tree blocked the side. If you come down here, after the tree was cut down about 10 years ago, and then what ended up happening was the lichen sort of disappeared. It revealed the rock carpet, and clearly it says John Howe, May the 18th, 1867. So the owner of Devil's Den carved his name on this rock a few years after the battle.
Man, he owned it literally. Okay, we're already 15 minutes behind on this live. Doug Downs, get on up here, and let's talk about what we see in here. Let's get back to a little fighting.
Okay, so this is a great vista for us to look at. We are sitting here in Devil's Den. We're looking off to the west, and you can see that far tree line. Remember, we're talking that this wave attack from south to north is coming from that far tree line. If you want to think about it, dominoes, domino number one is the Bannerlord Alabama Brigade. They're going to be coming across this field just to our left. Right next to them is going to be Robertson's Texas Brigade. They're going to be coming straight at us across the field. And behind them are two Georgia brigades under Henry Benning and then George Anderson. As they come across this field, first things first, right out, we can just make out a white barn just through those trees. That's where John Bell Hood will be wounded. The division commander is out in the first 10 to 15 minutes. And now what you have is these Alabamans will come up and over Big Round Top, and as they do, they're going to be targeted by these artillery pieces behind us. They're going to kick off two regiments, the 44th and 48th Alabama, will swing down and hit Devil's Den from the south. And as these Texas Brigade comes across the field, they're going to recognize this divide, and there's this piece of land we see right out in front of us. And what it's going to do is divide that Texas Brigade. So the 3rd Arkansas, the 1st Texas will be off to our right, and now we see the 4th and 5th Texas drifting off to our left. It'll do the same thing to Benny's Georgia Brigade as they follow him behind. Half of his brigade will go to the north, half of it will go to the south. And as we look across the ground, we walked across this morning, you can see how rough it is with those trees and all those boulders and rocks out there. Imagine trying to keep linear formation together across that ground. But then, you look off to the left, look down into that valley and see all the boulders down in there. Imagine how much harder it is to go ahead and take units through that ground. And yet, that's the ground that the Confederates would have to attack through in order to attack the southern face of Devil's Den and Little Round Top.
Excellent. Thanks, Doug. I'm sorry we're not really interacting with you too much. We'll do our best to take your questions. Connectivity is an issue down amidst the large rocks of Devil's Den. Before we go down and get into the den itself, I want to point out one particular rock. It's a rock, Chris, if you could focus on that end, Connor. It's the largest rock above the no parking sign over there. Because you're going to have a soldier, undoubtedly a Texan or a Georgian. He is lying dead for the camera of Alexander Gardner. He is laying right there next to that big rock. You can't quite see the big rock in the picture, but there are two rocks up above here. These two rocks are actually the two rocks right to our right, and we're going to walk over to these two rocks now because you can see a stone wall between them, and that is where this soldier will be dragged to by the photographer about 72 yards as we go. So let's walk around this big rock here, and we'll be there in a second. You're watching Civil War Trust Facebook Live 155 Gettysburg. I'm still learning to say American Battlefield Trust and Civil War Trust interchangeably. American Battlefield Trust is the umbrella organization for the Civil War Trust and the Revolutionary War Trust. Thanks for joining us.
Be sure to check out battlefields.org and check out our membership options that we have over there. We have all kinds of great free content. Our Stanley Battlefield maps. We have videos, info videos, anything you can think of, all free for you. And we do hope that you'll click that membership button when you do check out battlefields.org.
In a perfect world, we could put the cameras right here so we can line it up crouching next to it. Most Civil War photos were taken low to the ground because they're taken in 3D. And here is where the photo, the photographer moved the body to right this very spot here. I know it's not great with the sun, but you'll have to trust us. There was a pool of water in this rock right where Tim's bag is sitting. Water doesn't really pool there anymore because some of the rock is broken. But here's where the body was dragged to about 72 yards. William Fresnito and Frederick Gray discovered this in the 60s and 70s. And here you have it. He was laying right there, and it became one of the most famous photos of the Civil War. Here's a colorized version of it, which is particularly really brings it to life and I think can humanize this soldier. Unlike the other soldiers photographed at Gettysburg, this soldier must have died later. He is not bloated. He has not succumbed to the horrible, visuals of putrefaction and decomposition like the other, remains that you see here. This became a famous spot. Here it is, taken after 1900. Photographers kept taking pictures here in 1867 and then in the 1880s, and this one after 1900. And to this day, people like to come here and actually marvel that this is where a soldier breathed his last. But in this one case, this soldier died elsewhere, and the photographers moved the body. It doesn't mean they're moving bodies all over the place or anything. It means they moved this body, and this is the only documented case of photographers actually moving a body during the Civil War. Tim?
Oh, this is one of the most famous photographs of the entire Civil War. And lots of people, you can download this photograph in high resolution on the Library of Congress site. It's fascinating to look at the details of the photograph. And there's been lots of articles written about this particular photograph. People claim that the bodies were moved the other way. People claimed a few times that they knew who the body is. People have written that there are two different bodies and not the same body. A bunch of stuff written about it. I don't think I believe any of the articles written about it. It's pretty well, it just seems logical when you look at the photographs that this guy was laying down here, moved to this location. Buddy William Frassinito has written several chapters in his different books on what we actually know about the moved body. But I tell you, ever since I've been coming here as a young kid, you get this, I'm always drawn to the spot where this soldier was positioned, and often as a kid, I would lay down like the soldier at the spot myself and get my picture there taken too. And I've seen people, person after person after person do it with no coaxing. It's just you came up here, they see the photograph, and then they emulate the position of the body, sort of staging it just as the camera staged it in 1863.
That's real cool. And then I'll just say, Tim shows this picture that, engage with your battlefield in the legal manner in which you can. There's no rule book on exactly how to interact on a battlefield. We've all seen people pass out, lash out, laugh, cry, every bit of human emotion, just like during a battle, except decidedly less terrifying. Can be seen when you visit a battlefield. So engage respectfully, but do what feels right to you, as long as it's legal when you're on a battlefield. To me, I lay down in the spot the first time I ever came, and I've done it scores of times since then. That is not for some people to do. Remember, the soldier didn't actually die here. He was only dragged here, Tim.
When I was young, I used to lay down like the soldier and get my picture taken at the same spot. And here is a photograph. I'm going to give a shout out to my son, Sam. And so Sam is positioned like the soldier at the time. It was all right because he was old enough to know he was 2 years old, I think, at that time.
I'd like to request that all the photos we show henceforth be in print and positioned in the sun. We're going to keep going down here. Thanks, Tim. What is called the Top Devil's Den. Down there is a place called the Slaughter Den. That's the big one. Try to advance 3 information building. All alone, regiments, 2, 3, 400 coming through that position. Watch your step here as we go. This is the large formation of rocks at Devil's Den. Probably the largest on the battlefield, or at least among the largest on the battlefield, and certainly the most famous, the rocks of Devil's Den. As far as what Devil's Den actually is, people do not agree on that. People have been arguing about it since after the Civil War. We're going to talk about that a little bit as we get down there. But just check this out. I like to pause here sometimes just to show that Devil's Den is the only place in the game they actually filmed stuff where it actually happened. Most of the movie was filmed off the battlefield, but the capture of Smith's Battery was shot right up there and right here. As Tim likes to say, you have some Confederates coming up here, coming up on these very rocks and shooting. And famously, one guy gets shot off the rocks, and he will go flying off these rocks right here. They no doubt had some sort of a mattress or a pad for him to land on it over there. So for you Gettysburg movie fans, this is shot right here.
Yeah, undoubtedly, it would be part of the 17th Georgia Infantry that crosses ground during the fighting. And this is what they came up against, and this is what they had to cross in their line of battle. And that's really difficult for us to imagine today. One other thing, the rocks at Gettysburg are called diabases. And according to the Pennsylvania Geological Survey, they are 201.2 million years old.
We'd like to say 201.2 million and 13 years old, because 13 years ago, that's when we learned that. Let's see, so here we are across the big rocks of Devil's Den, and I'd like to talk about the guy in the 2nd Georgia that said that his friends were shot by the almost vertical fire from the blue-coated regulars This very spot on this road near the Devil's Den sign, that's where it happens here. Should we visit the original den real quick? Doug, did you have something to say?
So I think this is a really good place for us to stop, only because as you sit right in here, imagine all the chaos going around you. We talk about soldiers, most likely from the 99th Pennsylvania, shooting at the Confederates on this side of it. But if you turn and just look off to our right, at the same time, now all of a sudden you see a little round top all ablaze. The idea that you were sitting down on this valley, Union soldiers coming up the valley, Confederates coming through from the west. What a scene of carnage down here. Why, your attention may have been drawn up to the Union soldiers up above you. Off to your right, there are Union soldiers firing down this way too. So wherever direction you turn, there is no place for safety. You can imagine why they use these rocks and these boulders as places where they might find some cover and concealment out in this battlefield.
That's really interesting. And by the way, we know the sun's over there, and despite you think we have some Herculean efforts to really fix things, we cannot move the position of the sun. We'll do the best we can, so don't post on there, hey, it's washed out. We know, we're doing the best we can. Come on over here. Now, some people say they see the Devil's Den sign and assume all the rocks are sort of, that's Devil's Den. But Tim, the original guy who really popularized Devil's Den and whatnot, thought of something more specific.
John Batchelder, who was sort of the government historian of the Gettysburg National Military Park and the commission when it started. He's the guy who actually wrote about it and sort of suggested the Devil's Den is not this large mass of rocks. It's a very specific spot, a hole in the ground or a spring, which is at the base of Devil's Den. Let's walk over and see it then. You want to walk over and take a look at it? Okay. Wow, Gary will really enjoy this when he gets here because not often is there actually water coming out of the spring. It pretty much dried up long ago.
Much as there was in 1890s, as you can see right here.
This area is what is referred to when somebody mentions the Devil's Den. And what's interesting, there's caves that sort of run through there, and you can actually climb in and climb down and around and come out on the other side, or go through another cave and come up and on top of the rocks. So obviously, kids love Devil's Den. I loved Devil's Den when I was a kid. I think Gary liked Devil's Den when he was a little older than just a kid.
In fact, it's 30 years ago this month was my first trip here. I did not know enough about Devil's Den to know that this was the original den or that there was even an argument about it, but I did check out the Den shark through, walk around these rocks, and man, did I love it. There are 6 different ways in and out, and it's gonna be fun to see the cameramen crawl through them. Just kidding. But let me be clear, this is not Devil's Den, real quick. That is Devil's Den. There's a cave back in there, and John Batchelder said it's a cave under rocks. It's very difficult to get into, and there's a spring that flows from it, and that's the original Devil's Den. Now, as we turn back out, I'm going to ask Tim to talk about it because, man, there are big bears here, there are big raccoons here, there are big snakes here in the early stories of Devil's Den. Most are told by a guy named Emmanuel Bushman. So, Tim, if you'll lead us out, let's talk about some of the animals associated with Devil's Den.
So Devil's Den is pretty famous for being a place which is a cave where animals live. But the most famous creature that lives in Devil's Den is the black snake. And according to Emmanuel Bushman, writing about it in 1875, there was one large snake. And according to the account, he was big around in a man's waist. He was 15 or 20 feet long, and he was the devil. And this was his den. So people in Gettysburg always refer to it as Devil's Den. And according to Bushman, his grandmother said that the Native Americans before the European settlers used to talk about the snakes down here and the one big snake. And he said his name was Heap Big Snake.
That's great. There's also supposedly they called it Raccoon Den as well. There was a man named DeGroff and 2 nasty large raccoons charged on him for trespassing. The story is he was almost killed. There's another story about a Native American and Indian guy that came upon a bear and he reached down his throat and ripped out his heart and the bear died. And there's all sorts of great stories about this. There is Native American fighting documented within a mile of this position. The Battle of the Crows, supposedly, maybe 100 Indians or Native Americans engaged at the time. So, man, you can go back and forth with the stories of myth and legend. And today is July 2nd. 2nd, 2018. It's Gettysburg 155 tonight. Tim, Chris, and I will all be at the Gettysburg Heritage Center. Tim's doing John Burns, Chris is doing the Wheatfield, and I'm talking about Devil's Den. If you want to learn more about Devil's Den too, download the Civil War Trust Gettysburg, Barrett is soon be called American Battlefield Trust Gettysburg Battle app. We have a specific one just on Devil's Den and Little Round Top called the Day 2 app. So if you want to learn more, there's lots on our website, battlefields.org, and there's lots on the App Store as well, whether you're an Android user or a smartphone user. We're going to keep moving here as we go from the Devil's Bath right here. This is supposedly maybe where the snake he would go and kill and capture little kids around Gettysburg, unsuspecting little kids and whatnot. He would go up to the Devil's Kitchen, serve them up, bathe here afterward, and then hang out in the Devil's Den. I don't know. It's probably called Devil's Den because of the rocky nature of the ground. You look at devils anything around the country, it's all rocky areas. The Pennsylvania Dutch farmers around here used to call rocks the devil because they were supposedly put there by the devil to inhabit their fields and mess with the rock formations at this point. Anything to add here, Doug? No is the answer, because who cares about this stuff? It's only Tim and I anyway here. Tim's walking toward the front of the Devil's Den. This is the most famous rock formation of the Devil's Den. It's known as the Table Rock. We've got all sorts of other good rocks named around here. The Wad Rock, the Table Rock, the Run-Up Rock, because kids and some immature adults like to run up that rock without using their hands as well. We've got all sorts of other stuff going on around here. So for the Table Rock, in a nutshell, I know Chris is dying to do the Austin Powers line at that point. This is this big rock. Now that massive rock, and I've seen estimations between 200 and 800, 600 tons for that rock. There's one point of that rock sloping down where it sits, pointed, touching another rock, and that point is about this big. It's about the size of my hand. The Park Service became concerned about this over the years, and they hired an engineering firm in the 70s and made hash marks on it to see if the rock is moving. They determined absolutely the Table Rock will fall. And you could imagine what that's going to look like, and hopefully nobody's under it when it comes down. I'm happy to say in about 40 years, the hash marks have not moved. That rock has not shifted in the last 40 years. Now, we were talking earlier on the last live, and by the way, look at the live we did this morning of Hood's Charge. Look at the live that we did last year at Gettysburg 154. Go to, on your desktop, you can find an easy playlist under videos on the American Battlefield Trust Facebook page. On your mobile device, it's a little harder to find, but bear with us. We did Devil's Den last year as well. We did Little Round Top last year as well, so you can fill in anything we don't talk about here. But with all the tourism going around here, and in the 1890s, you didn't take a camera with you. You went to the camera, and the camera was here. Tim, what did the local people do because they knew a camera would be here?
It's fascinating, Devil's Den, and the commercialism that surrounded it. It's really hard to fathom today. But Devil's Den became very popular because of the weird, eerie appearance of the rocks. Besides the fact that there was heavy fighting here, and because there were so many rocks and it was hard to bury bodies were continually eroding out of the ground, and people were finding bones from the soldiers that were involved in the fighting years after the battle. So cameraman William Tipton specifically and the Mumper family set up a photographic studio over here. Remember we mentioned by 1893 there was an electric railway, and by 1894 this place was very crowded. And cameramen arrived here. They set up their photographers' equipment in front of the rocks, and were taking photographs of people in front of the Table Rock. And because of that, local people began to carve their name on the rocks of Devil's Den.
Okay, and I think I can find a picture of that as I go along in it, because they knew, give me a sec, Connor, I'm going to show you a better picture here anyway. They knew that if they put their name on the Table Rock, first let me show it to Chris, then I'll show it to Connor here, that their name would appear in thousands, if not tens of thousands of photos. Now, you look at that rock now, and on the right day, you might be able to see the H and the CH here. You can't see the Maurice spots, and if you can tell, the sun is actually cooperating. You can see that there are big splotches there because in the 1890s, specifically 1894, the U.S. government came in and carefully removed them, and that meant taking chisels and chiseling into the rocks, and for a good 15 years, the rocks looked splotched where they removed the graffiti. They did that because they figured, and it's not like these were soldiers putting their initials in. Now, this was local graffiti. They figured if they didn't scratch them out then, that everybody would continue to do it, and they were probably right. Happily for us, there are still a few left the government missed, or that came after the government chiselers were here, actually, and you can still see some of those, and some of those are connected with the locals, such as John Howe's 1867 carving. That one escaped the chiselers. He owned Devil's Den. I think his should have been allowed to stay. Tim? Yes. Okay, good. Let's keep moving here. Anybody else jump in as you go. We're actually going to make this a short live. We're not going to go too much farther, but let's pan off to the right real quick as we walk. We're not going to go over there, but that's where the operations were taking place. That's where Tipton had his park. That's where the trolley would stop. Right above that, across that bridge over there, you had spring water, you had big fight in the late 1890s as to whether this would become a giant tourist attraction or a historic shrine. And this eventually went to the U.S. Supreme Court as the U.S. government condemned the trolley successfully. And that set the case law. Yes, the government can condemn land for purposes of a historical park.
So also not bad that we're down here, because now we start to see some of these other Union monuments that come down here, these Union regiments. Imagine if you're a member of the 4th Maine, you started the day and you were up on top of Devil's Den, and you're going to get orders to come down in this valley. If you're the commander of the 4th Maine, you know this is a bad deal. And yet, nonetheless, in order to go ahead and stave off the defense of the Union line, they're going to come down the backside of this, and now they're going to be down in this valley. They're going to accept a worse position because that's what the rest of the Army needs for them to do. And we find other units that get sent down here. You have the 140th New York or the 40th New York down in the middle of this valley that come from the wheat field to be sent down in here. Imagine coming from another good position to being sent down into this valley of death, sitting between these rocks and this crag of boulders known as Devil's Den and the high ground that's Little Round Top.
Oh, that's great. 2 more things before we wrap up here at Devil's Den. And man, could we spend 8 hours here? I'd love to give an 8-hour tour of Devil's Den again. I haven't done it in a long time, but the 4th Maine Monument, they put this up in the early 1890s. The colonel designed it. They left the colonel's name off the monument. Water is gathering into the base of it. They got the casualty figures wrong. They put the flank markers in the wrong position so that they were facing in the wrong direction. And Red Diamond, division, some weren't put on right. They were falling off. So, in about 1895, they moved the flank markers so that it would be in the right position and the regiment would be facing the right way. They took the Red Diamonds and put them on the cement instead of gypsum. They put the colonel's name on it, fixed the casualty figures. And in the most useless thing we'll tell you during this anniversary, it might be second most, they dug this little trench right here, which has been allowing water to drain out of this hole and has been staining the rock ever since. What does that teach us about the Battle of Gettysburg? Nothing. But understanding the battlefield after the Civil War, when post-war features dotted the landscape, this is the battlefield the veterans knew. They knew this battlefield, the 1890s battlefield, better than they knew the 1863 battlefield. This is the one they remember. They were being shot at. Let's take a few steps here and conclude over here, because we said why Devil's Den got its name. We're really not sure about it, but a lot of it's associated with animals and whatnot. And Tim, at a distance, actually spotted something over there. He's going to go get it. He's going to trudge on through there, no matter the ticks, no matter what's in there. He's going to go over to that rock and pull something out. This is not staged. This was already there. I can see it from here. Let's check it out. Oh, it's not still here. Yeah. Hey, be careful so it doesn't fall apart. Let's see how. Oh, it's not a tiny one. Oh, yeah. So look at this. The Devil's Den is aptly named. What is this? Hold on. Hold it closer to the camera so we can say, look, it's 26 feet long. And here it is. So the snakes often hang out in the rocks of Devil's Den. The largest one I've seen in this area was about 11 feet long. Black snake. That's the most common, the northern black racer. Still only about this thick. It's not like it's going to swallow you. But I did beat a hasty retreat, even though it's not poisonous. There are copperheads here, but they're very rarely seen in this area. They love this rock. This is not the rock. With this, I'm going to top it, Tim. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for engaging with us on Facebook. And, of course, thanks for supporting the Battlefield. Everybody, we are up here on Little Round Top. This is Gettysburg 155 Live. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. I'm Gary Edelman. That's Chris White behind the camera. That's Connor Townsend behind that camera. We got Lieutenant Dan still looking for another battlefield promotion over there. I'm also American Battlefield Trust. They're really happy to be joined by Tim Smith and Doug Downs, both licensed battlefield guides and more. And we're up on Little Round Top. We're going to spend a short time amount up here. I'm going to ask you to go back to last year's Little Round Top video that we have to fill in any gaps that we don't have here. Again, on your desktop, go to Facebook, American Battlefield Trust Facebook page, go to videos, and you'll see a whole playlist worth. It's a little harder to find on your mobile device, but here we go, up on Little Round Top now, and we are, as guides give summaries up here. Set us up, Tim.
Okay, so we're in the area of Little Round Top. And of course, this is the end of the northern line of battle on July 2nd and 3rd, the line we generally refer to as the Fish Hook. So in a general sense, the northern line runs from Big and Little Round Top all the way to Cemetery Hill. And if you look up in that direction, you'll see a light blue water tower on top of Cemetery Hill. From there, the Union line curves around to Coles Hill. seminary. You can see a red barn with 3 white ventilators on it. And on top of that, in the edge of the woods, is the seminary building, or the chapel of the seminary sticking up above the trees. The southern line of battle ran along that wooded ridge line as far as you can see. Straight across, there's a large metal tower, observation tower, built in 1895 by the War Department, and the line continued along that ridge past that beige house where we started our Hood's Charge tour from this morning. And then you continue on where the trees are broken up by the road. That's where the Texas Monument is located. And then a little farther down at the base of Seminary Ridge, under what is the ski slopes out there, you can see maybe the Alabama Monument. The northern line of battle is some 3.5 miles long. The southern line is 6 miles long. But the Southern Army have less men. Their line is farther spread out. And during the battle, the Southern Army is crossing an open field and charging up a hill. And you saw how rough some of the ground they covered was. Of course, on the second day of the battle, the Northern Army, at the beginning of the fight, is not exactly in the shape of the giant fishhook, because there's a general, Daniel Edgar Sickles, the commander of the 3rd Army Corps. And for whatever reason, and of course there's lots of stuff written about it, he is not satisfied with the position that he has been given. So he decided to move his troops forward. And he ended up lining his men up from the rocks of Devil's Den, across through the Rosewood Lot, the wheat field, the peach orchard, and down the Emmitsburg Road, past those red barns. And when Sickles moved his 10,000 men forward against orders, he left this hill unoccupied. Of course, on the second day of the battle, thousands of Southern soldiers would attack the southern end of the Northern line, and it would be heavy fighting out in front of us. But Little Round Top, at the outset of the fight, was unoccupied.
That sounds great, Tim. Good. Great setup, and let's talk about it, because we know there's actually a fight for Little Round Top. Who's going to... fight on Little Round Top. Doug, let's talk about that.
Okay, so now we have all those troops in position. Let's talk about how this goes down. What we're going to realize is George Gordon Meade's going to ride out in the peach orchard and realize what Dan Sickles has done. And he's going to make 4 quick decisions. He's going to figure out all the pieces that need to go and support the 3rd Corps. Hancock's 2nd Corps. The 5th Corps is only reserve on the field and parts of the artillery reserve. And one of the last decisions he makes is he's going to send his chief engineer, Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren, who's standing on that boulder. He's going to say, go up to that high ground and tell me what I've missed. Warren will arrive up here and stand just as he stands today with binoculars in hand and look out across these fields and find the Confederates are now advancing from that far tree line. And the problem for the Union Army at about 4 o'clock on the afternoon of July 2nd is that first domino of that Confederate wave attack is going to arrive here and never hit the Union line that's down on Devil's Den. So now it's a race. It's a race to get troops here. Who will get here first? The Confederates coming from that far tree line, or Union troops that will arrive? All kinds of aides for Warren will be down in that valley looking for Union troops. In fact, one of the couriers is going to run into a brigade that's sitting down there commanded by Colonel Strong Vincent. And he'll say, I'm looking for your division commander. He's like, yeah, he's in the wheat field. What's that message say? Yeah, I'm looking for General Barnes. I heard it. What's that message say? And finally, the courier's going to give a message and it says, we need a brigade up here. And Vincent will rush his brigade up here, and they're going to arrive with about 5 minutes to spare before that first domino of the Confederates comes across Big Round Top and strikes this position.
Yeah, it's really cool. Here you have an army of armies, 160,000 soldiers here, and individual valor and courage, individual decisions, what Gouverneur Kevin Warren does, what we're going to learn about what Patty O'Rourke does, what Strong Vincent does, what Joshua Chamberlain does, what individual soldiers do can really help affect the outcome of this battle, an important battle. We don't even got to get into the what if of what would have happened if the Confederates won Gettysburg. I think it depends on how they won Gettysburg. But let's get to the top up here and still visit some more. You're watching the American Battlefield Trust, Gettysburg 155 Live. Thanks for joining us here today. Sorry we can't interact with too many of your questions or connectivity down on this part of the field. Get gets difficult. And now we're going up to the very crest of Little Round Top. And during the Battle of Gettysburg, there's going to be one battery up here, not really advantageously placed. It can't really reach down into the Valley of Death or anywhere where the Confederates are actually attacking. And to be clear, the attacks on Little Round Top are not coming from the beautiful view from the west. They are coming mostly from the south over on that side. But to get guns up here is what the battery members remembered of Battery D5th U.S. Charles Hazlitt's battery. And these soldiers didn't say, man, I saw a lot of my friends die. Wow, I got to watch Pickett's charge. What they mostly wrote about was it was really hard to get these guns on top of Little Round Top. These barrels weigh 800, 900 pounds each. They had to be brought up here by manpower alone. Only one was able to get up here with a horse. And Hazlitt is over here, and he's with his friend General Weed. General Weed, in command of a brigade, was supposedly standing on this rock right behind me, and he is shot by a Confederate. I think it was probably a mini ball. We don't know where it came from. We never know where it came from, hardly, in the Civil War. And he falls upon the rock and says, I am cut in two. I want to see Hazlitt. And supposedly, Hazlitt bends over to hear Weed's dying words, and he is shot dead upon the body of his dying friend. Now, there's some people that question that story and the location as well, but I'll tell you this. The accounts point toward Weed falling on a rock near Hazlitt's rightmost piece, and from what I can tell, and I've done a lot of research on this, Hazlitt's rightmost piece was right behind the camera over there. So I don't know if this is the rock where they fell, but this makes sense to me. Not to mention that the first monuments on the battlefield are not big granite ones like this one, but rather they are rock carvings. Maybe the camera could go around one way or the other. And see, this rock carving has been here since October of 1864, or maybe into 1865, as Tim Smith likes to say. It says, C.E. Hazlitt fell here, commanding C-O-M''G, Battery D of 5th U.S. Artillery in battle July 2nd, 1863. This thing has been here since right around the time of the Civil War. During the Civil War, it was carved, and we don't know who carved it, but it seems to be in the right location. And this monument here used to sit where that monument is, right past it. Then Pennsylvania appropriated more money. They built a larger monument. That's what $1,500 bought you back then. And then they put their smaller monument on this rock and dedicated it to the memory of General Weed, the brigade commander. Awesome. So let's go down here. Let's figure out when Colonel Strong Vincent this is brigade up here. And it's unique brigade. It's not made up of men from North New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio. It's a mixed brigade. It's made up of men from Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, and Maine. What he's going to do is he's going to bring them down and put them in position where the threat is coming from. This is the southern side of Little Round Top. And so we can start to make out some markers. The 16th Michigan, just off to our right front. The 44th New York, the largest regimental marker on the field, 44 feet high, and if you go in the middle of that castle monument, it's 12 feet by 12 feet, also for the 12th New York. So you can see where the right two regiments of Vincent's men go. Good. So as we're coming up here, again, I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned or not, so Vincent was smart. He didn't put his men way up on the top where his men would form a convenient silhouette. He puts them down there, as Doug mentioned, on the military crest with a great field of fire, without forming the silhouette, with a way that artillery can fire over your head as you go. Now, we're going to pass by a plaque and a couple of monuments. We'll come back to this afterward. But we're really going to go over to the side of the hill where everything happened. See, the Texans and Alabamians who attacked here, they reached this part of the hill first. It's closer to them. The Alabamians who ended up fighting in the woods against the 83rd Pennsylvania and 20th Maine, they had to go all the way to the top of Big Round Top, down the other side, and then make this attack 2, 3, 4, 5 times, depending on what you call an attack. So let's get over here. I don't know if Tim Smith wants to do the attacking on this side of the hill. If he demurs, I'll do it. So let's see if Tim does his famous Tim run and comes up to the front here. Well, it's kind of a fast walk. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay. So, Little Round Top's kind of interesting that in the fact that part of Little Round Top is wooded and part of it is open. And Vincent's brigade that formed the Union line of battle occupied the wooded area of Little Round Top and the open area here in front of us. And if you draw yourself an imaginary line from Little Round Top to Devil's Den up the Seminary Ridge, you kind of get an idea of the town. North of that line, north of the area of Devil's Den, that's where the Texans and the Georgians fought against General Sickles' advanced position. But south of this imaginary line, this is where the Texans and Alabamians swung up and over Big Round Top and hit the area of the hill in front of us. Vince's brigade arrived a few minutes before the attack. Very quickly, there were more Southern soldiers than Northerners in the initial attack. The Texans worked their way around on the low shelf of Little Round Top and actually outflanked part of the 16th Michigan Regiment, and the Michigan soldiers started to fall back. At that moment, Colonel Colonel Strong Vincent jumped up on a rock behind us somewhere, supposedly, and he was mortally wounded. And at this point, it looked like the Southern Army might be successful. But I think, Dan, we're going to talk a little bit. Is this where you want to?
Well, actually, let's continue the Vincent story, then we'll move over to the 140th. So right now, this is a perilous position, right? Vincent's on his rock. The 16th Michigan is falling back. Oh my God. Let's talk about Vincent for a second, real quick, if we may, because again, Vincent's got a death marker about 70 yards away from here. It's just down the hill. It's one of the early monuments on the battlefield. In fact, one of the first two outside the National Cemetery. But 13 or 14 years before that, somebody carved this on the rock. Obviously, the same person. Colonel Strong Vincent fell here, commanding COM''G, 2nd Brigade or 3rd Brigade, 2nd Brigade. I thought it was 3rd, 1st Division, 5th Corps. July 2nd. Okay, it is 3rd Brigade. It's hard to tell from here.
Sometimes when people put ink in the inscription, they don't
mess it up.
do it correctly.
Okay.
Of course they did. They did go up correctly with the backwards S.
Pretty cool. So in this case, I'll say that we don't know who carved this thing, but in this particular case, they seem to have gotten it right again. By all accounts, Vincent was rallying the men of the 16th Michigan, whose monument you can see right over there. This one seems to be correct. It seems like the other one, erected by the members of the 83rd Pennsylvania, wanted to place Vincent's Fall inside their lines, but the documents show that they were up this way as well. So again, you can learn from the battlefield by learning about the battlefield, which is really cool. Now, so as he said, it's a perilous moment. Vincent falls down, mortally wounded. The 16th Michigan, with their flag, part of which has retreated up to the hill. It's a horrible moment. Dan?
We're headed over now to the monument for the 140th New York Infantry. It's one of the more popular monuments here on Little Round Top. Had I shaved this morning, I'd probably look like the gentleman who's on it. Patrick H. O'Rourke. O'Rourke is an Irish immigrant. He'll finish first in his class at West Point in June of 1861. He's an engineer in the early stages of the war, but here he's going to command the 140th New York Infantry. And the 140th New York is on its way to Little Round Top, and they get up to the crest of the hill where we're standing at a fortuitous moment. The 16th Michigan, the right end of Vincent's line, is giving way. O'Rourke's going to lead his men up over the top of the hill, down the crest, and as he's moving down through these rocks, he's going to be struck down. He's going to fall amidst the rocks over to the camera's left. But the 140th is going to push ahead. They're going to engage the 1st Texas and push the 1st Texas back and stabilize the line. Now you may notice the patina on O'Rourke's nose. And for good luck, visitors to Little Round Top rub his nose.
Okay, rapid fire quiz.
And stabilize the line. Now you may notice the patina on O'Rourke's nose. And for good luck, visitors to Little Round Top rub his nose.
Okay, rapid fire quiz right here, impromptu. Okay, he's first in his class at West Point. Who's last in that same class?
George Armstrong Custer.
Oh, welcome. Okay, we gave him his cavalry moment there. According to the monument, how many people are in this regiment?
526.
526. Good. Where are these guys from?
Rochester, New York, Monroe County Regiment.
And had these guys loaded their guns before they came crashing over the hill? No, we really don't know. I think no, but I'm not really sure.
Well, at least the leading company did not.
Yeah, good, very cool.
So wait, before we leave here, so the other cool thing, because we talked about the monument, so they've got one cool thing. So if you look at the top of this, it says valor, fraternity, patriotism, and duty. And those are all the values for which men wore the uniform. But here's the rub, gang. 526 men from the state of New York don't come charging down this hill into a bunch of screaming Texans for those values. They charge down this hill because a guy like Patty O'Rourke leads them.
All right, let me mention, since you talked about
trying
it,
to go.
Custer was last in this class, but Custer had hopped over his entire class in rank in 2 years, and Custer was a general at this battle. How did that happen?
Well, they had a need for brigade commanders and more, and you're going to have cavalry commanders boosted in June of 1863, skipping from captain through major, through lieutenant colonel, through colonel, all the way to brigadier general. You've got one of them is cut.
Give them hell! Get moving! Nice! Enemy! Onwards! Forward! Get moving! Forward! Move! Move! Get moving! Onwards! Forward! Forward! Have at 'em! Move!
the game.